So let's set the stage for the spring of AD 33 with a pretty provocative question. Could a Roman banking crisis have actually sealed the fate of Jesus Christ? Now, usually when we think about the historical events surrounding the crucifixion, we tend to focus purely on the religious and political conflicts happening within the walls of Jerusalem. But, history doesn't happen in a vacuum. What if I told you that the decisions made by the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, were heavily influenced by an economic meltdown happening hundreds of miles away across the Mediterranean Sea? We're basically looking at two totally distinct storylines here. On one side, you have wealthy Roman senators losing their sprawling estates. On the other, a carpenter from Nazareth is overturning tables in Jerusalem. These two worlds seem completely disconnected, right? I mean, in Rome, the capital is experiencing a severe cash shortage and a devastating credit crunch, meaning nobody could borrow money. Meanwhile, in Judea, a highly contested religious figure is challenging the authority of the local elite. But as we'll see, the economic fragility of the empire created a political pressure cooker that left the local governor with virtually no room to maneuver. Let's start with part one, the Roman financial panic. Okay, so 1,400 miles away from Jerusalem, the Roman Empire was teetering on the absolute brink of financial ruin. And it's crazy how the timeline played out because they managed to accidentally trigger a massive recession. It all started when an old, largely ignored law passed by Julius Caesar, which regulated usury and required lenders to hold a certain amount of Italian farmland, was suddenly revived. For years, people just ignored this law. But in AD 33, a flood of cases hit the Roman courts. The Senate and Emperor Tiberius decided to strictly enforce it, giving lenders an 18-month grace period to buy up land. But instead of an orderly transition, complete panic ensued. Moneylenders aggressively called in their outstanding loans to raise the cash they needed to buy land, instantly draining liquidity from the entire Roman economy. What's really fascinating about this is how the ultra-wealthy, people holding plenty of assets, became functionally broke almost overnight in one of the earliest recorded financial contagions. Because everyone was calling in loans to buy land at the exact same time, borrowers had to sell off their own properties just to pay back their debts. This sudden flood of real estate hitting the market caused land values to absolutely plummet. It was a classic fire sale. People couldn't liquidate their holdings fast enough, major banks began to fail across the empire, and interest rates shot through the roof. The Roman elite, senators and knights, were literally being ruined. To stop the bleeding, Emperor Tiberius had to step in with a massive bailout, 100 million sesterces. To put that in perspective, that was an astronomical fortune back then. He offered interest-free loans for 3 years to landowners in distress. This was basically the ancient equivalent of quantitative easing, where a central government steps in to pump money back into a failing system. The government had to act as the lender of last resort to stabilize the collapsing market. And while this bailout eventually stopped the crash, the economic damage was already done, and the political anxiety radiating from Rome out to its provinces was palpable. Which brings us to part 2, disrupting the temple economy. Let's shift gears and move over to Judea for our second storyline. By the spring of AD 33, Jesus of Nazareth's public ministry was hitting its climax as he entered Jerusalem for the Passover festival. He had gathered a massive following, and his teachings were directly challenging the local religious authorities. To really understand what happened next, we have to look at the physical space of the temple. The inner courts were strictly for the Jewish population. Gentiles were barred from entering these inner sanctuaries under penalty of death. But the one space designated for non-Jews to worship, the massive outer courtyard known as the Court of the Gentiles, had been entirely overrun by the commercial activity necessary to sustain the temple's sacrificial system. You see, this marketplace wasn't just a convenience. It was a major economic engine. According to the laws of the time, Jewish pilgrims traveling from all over the known world had to pay a temple tax. But they couldn't just use everyday Roman or Greek coins. They actually had to exchange their money for the Tyrian shekel, the official temple currency. On top of that, they had to buy animals for sacrifice that met strict purity standards. The money changers and merchants charged exorbitant fees for these services, totally preying on weary travelers. And the religious leadership, the Sanhedrin, condoned this and likely took a very lucrative cut of this highly exploitative system. So, when Jesus walked into that specific courtyard, overturned the tables, and drove out the livestock, he struck a massive blow against the financial corruption of the temple elite. He publicly condemned them for turning a house of prayer for all nations into a den of robbers. By physically clearing this market with a whip of cords, Jesus wasn't just making a theological point. He was directly disrupting the Sanhedrin's economic system. For the Jewish high priests, this was way more than a nuisance. It was an existential threat to their power, their revenue stream, and their fragile control over a volatile population during a highly crowded holiday week. And that leads right into part 3, Pilate caught in the middle. Now we meet the man caught directly in the crossfire of this escalating local tension and Rome's global panic, Pontius Pilate. Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea, and his primary job was simple: collect taxes and keep the peace. He was a man trying his best to keep that peace, highly aware that he lacked the military forces to put down a massive rebellion without relying on the very local elites who now desperately wanted Jesus gone. Plus, Pilate's track record, not great. He had already offended Jewish religious sensibilities on multiple occasions, nearly sparking riots in the past. He was walking a tightrope, knowing full well that his boss, Emperor Tiberius, was highly suspicious, aging, and living in a paranoid voluntary exile on the island of Capri. Think about this from Pilate's perspective for a second. What happens when you face a localized rebellion during a global financial meltdown? He effectively had a gun to his head. He was terrified of drawing the ire of Rome when the imperial treasury was already bleeding. I mean, the Roman Empire is in the middle of a massive cash shortage. The emperor just bailed out the Roman elite to the tune of 100 million sesterces. The absolute last thing Rome wants to hear about is an uprising in the eastern provinces that would require an expensive military intervention and disrupt the flow of tax revenue. Pilate knows for a fact he absolutely cannot afford a riot in Jerusalem. This brings us to our final act, part 4, the final verdict. These two massive story arcs violently crash together in the spring of AD 33, when Pilate has to face Jesus, the religious leaders, and an angry mob all at once. The Jewish authorities arrest Jesus, but lacking the legal right to execute him, they bring him straight to the governor. Pilate examines Jesus and quickly realizes, okay, this is a religious dispute, not an armed insurrection against Rome. He actually finds no fault in Jesus and engages in this intense battle of wills with the crowd. Pilate even offers a compromise: release Jesus or release Barabbas, a convicted political rebel and murderer. Pilate fully expects them to choose Jesus, but the religious leaders stir up the crowd to demand Barabbas instead. The religious elite, well, they knew exactly how to play Pilate. As it was noted back then, nothing, literally nothing, was so terrifying to a Roman governor as having the people send a complaining embassy to Rome. They essentially told Pilate, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. In the ancient Roman political system, a formal complaint sent by local elites to a morbid, suspicious emperor who is already dealing with a financial panic, that could be a death sentence for a governor, especially one whose political patron back in Rome had recently been executed for treason. So the local leaders pivoted. They dropped the religious blasphemy angle and framed Jesus as a direct political rival to the emperor himself. They argued that anyone claiming to be the King of the Jews was subverting the nation and opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar. That specific charge, that Jesus claimed to be a king, elevated the trial from a local religious dispute into a formal accusation of high treason against Rome. This forced Pilate into an inescapable corner. He could no longer just wave it away as an internal squabble. Ignoring a claim of kingship was treason by complicity. Fearing an insurrection and totally desperate for political survival during a time of immense imperial stress, Pilate makes a decision diametrically opposed to Roman justice. He had explicitly stated he found no guilt in the man standing before him. Yet, the combination of a rioting mob at his doorstep and a volatile, cash-strapped emperor back in Rome made doing the right thing politically impossible. Pilate washed his hands of the matter, literally and figuratively, and ordered the execution. Ultimately, we see exactly how a severe economic crisis in Rome severely limited Pilate's political options in Judea. When the global system is under that kind of intense stress, local administrators prioritize stability above absolutely everything else. Pilate sacrificed an innocent man because the political capital required to save him was entirely bankrupt. The financial panic of AD 33 meant Rome had zero tolerance for provincial disorder, and Pilate acted entirely out of self-preservation. Which leaves us with a really fascinating final thought to take away from this explainer. How much of history is shaped not just by beliefs, but by the unseen hand of economic crisis. The most famous trial in history was inextricably linked to the boom and bust of the Roman financial machine. It's a powerful reminder that massive historical events are rarely the result of a single cause, but rather the dramatic, messy intersection of deeply held local beliefs and the immense unseen pressures of the wider economic world.